Great. Okay, yeah, so as I said, we're going to go through some new items with some new logbook features, some new mapping tools, um, maintenance mode, which has been around for a while, but I don't think we've really um, explained it too much, and just a few other small items that have been introduced to trend data entry sheets if we have the time. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So I have two logbooks here that I have to show you today, classic logbooks and period logbooks. I'm going to start with just the classic because it's kind of something that we're all familiar with. Um, so one of the big changes I think that will make things easier for administrators or supervisors is the logbook editing screen. It's no longer just one big long list of options and endless scrolling to go down. They've kind of been broken up into new tabs and kind of sections to deal with um, how we kind of manage these logbooks. Just a better new look and feel type thing. And you'll notice there's a new tab here called logbook periods that I'll get to in a second. The first item I want to talk about is this new feature or this new option called constrained entry times to user shift. This is something that kind of came up in our own internal testing. We had a few people ask a few questions about shifts. So as you can see on this first page here, I'm not in a shift right now and I need to be in order to create an entry. So I'll just add myself into a shift entry for the morning, which is more like a day shift. I will create that. And now I can actually create a logbook entry. But one of the items that kind of raised a few eyebrows here is my shift is starting at 8 o'clock, but I can actually create an entry for 7 o'clock a.m., which up until now, eRIS has always assumed that if you are in a shift for the day, you can make an entry for that day. So something that obviously raised some eyebrows here is maybe we should be restricting them to only be able to create entries within their shift time. So this new setting of constrained entry times to user shift is actually the way to do this now. And this option will appear if you have the user in shift entry to create entry selected. So if I select that, just make sure I'm loaded here. I will save that option. I'll reload this page. And since I am falling within the time bounds of my shift, I can create an entry. But if I go back to 7 a.m. now, you can see the screen kind of locks me out and I can no longer create a shift for this time. But I can move back into my shift range and I can create a shift. And this goes the opposite way as well. 7:05 will not let me shift. This is not something that's going to be turned on automatically by default. It is something that you'll have to go in and select moving forward. So operators won't get randomly locked out if you don't have this change selected. It's just an optional change, something that came up in our own internal testing. We just thought we should add an option here. So the big exciting item for logbooks that I do want to talk about today is something called logbook periods. Motivation is kind of coming out of some of the conversations we had at the last partner conference. I think mainly Toronto and Aqua have brought it up, maybe a few other partners, but that the period bounds from the midnight to midnight might not fit all use cases where we have in this logbook, we have all the entries are sorted day by day, where some of the periods might make more sense to be more night and day type boundaries. And some issues where if a user starts at 10 o'clock at night and they go till 4 a.m., well, then they have to create themselves in two different shift entries in order to make entries on those two different days. So logbook periods kind of comes from that motivation to kind of give you the ability to customize how things are grouped on the logbook, specifically around shift entries and how they're created or how they're managed and locking people in and out of the logbook. So there's new tab. It is available to anyone who wants to use it. I think in the most recent 4 or 5 sims. It does have to be enabled by support, mostly just because the mobile app does not have support for the logbook periods yet. We're working on that right now. So if you were using a logbook or you want to test out logbook periods, but you don't use the mobile app, it is something that we can enable for you. But it will come out of the box, no extra setup very soon because that mobile app version is on the way. So I actually have another logbook set up here that I've called periods that already has this setting kind of configured. So this dropdown, by default, it's a per day, which is how all current logbooks are kind of operating now. So you can think of your current logbooks operating under a per day logbook period shift, where the period is from midnight to midnight every day. But the defined 24-hour period kind of allows you to flex that around a little bit. You do still have to meet a 24-hour range as you create the logbook periods. That way there are no gaps in the day or the week where operators can just add entries without a shift. So here you can kind of pick your options here. So I'm just kind of going with the day and night. So I say that my day starts at 7 a.m. and goes to 1600 hours. And then from 1600 hours till 7 a.m. is kind of the next period range that I can go to. Now, if I pick something invalid, I'm just going to get a warning and I'm not going to be able to save it until I go back and fix it. And if I go too far and at too much time, I'm also not going to be able to save this period. So it does have to meet the 24-hour period. So I've already set this logbook up. I've already created a few entries for it. So if I switch over to my periods tab here on the logbook, I'm going to see that no longer do I have day by day groupings here, but I actually have logbook period names set up here. And also just in brackets, the actual date timestamp of when that period is taking place. So here, this is my day shift yesterday, and here are all the entries that were created. And you can see the shift here as opposed to our classic logbook. In our classic logbook, all of the shifts always get defaulted to midnight of that day, where the periods will actually default to the start of that period time. So that way, if you have someone working from the 1600 hour to 7 a.m., they're going to be able to add themselves to one shift entry at this point in time to carry over until the next morning and day. And this is just kind of how these get sorted now. There's no longer day by day, and you can actually see there's two blocks here on April 15th that are just going from two different time ranges. The shift dialog basically kind of looks the same as well. Just no longer do we see the day in this drop-down list, or if you are using the custom option, you'll be able to pick the period and then you'll get the date selector here. But here you have what period you want to actually create the shift for, and you can scroll down this list and pick any one of these periods that are available to add yourself to a certain period. So this is my period from yesterday. I mean, I can add myself to my current period. And I'm going to have a shift that starts at 7 a.m. here, and I'll be able to create a test entry for the day period. And that's at 1400, so I can save this. And here I am here. This also, this does restrict people or users from logging shifts at the wrong time. So if I actually come in, let's see here. I think there's a shift for every one of these days. But if I change today's shift and remove myself, and I will add Ryan in here. I'm not allowed to create a shift here, but if I go back a day to the 14, I can because I'm in this shift. But if I go before, actually I'm in this shift down here. And then obviously when I go back, I'm not gonna be able to create a shift. So this still restricts users from certain times of the day for the periods. Does anyone have any questions about logbook periods? Anything that's unclear that maybe I went over too quick? I can't see it in the chat, but if anyone wants to ask your question, go for it. All right. Great. Okay, I will move on from logbook periods. If anyone else has any questions on it later, just let us know. It is something that we're going to work on refining a little bit more if there are more configuration options or changes that we need to kind of work through. So some of the other new tools that we've been kind of building for a new client out in Florida are some new mapping tools. Mapping tools is something we get questions about every so often, and we've kind of been able to create just some new ways to kind of map some data on the page on this map dashboard screen and view information kind of regarding what's on the map and tags. So Lake Worth Drainage District is responsible for managing the water kind of in and around the Lake Worth between West Palm Beach and Pompano Beach area. And they have control structures there that operate and move water in and out of the system depending on rainflow. And if anyone saw the flooding in Fort Lauderdale, I'm sure their weeks got a lot more fun last week. So here we have the option to kind of map blueprints and mappings, which is a little bit confusing with the term map twice, but for anyone who doesn't know what our blueprint and mapping options are, basically the blueprints and mappings can kind of act as a bit of a template and implementation kind of idea, where a blueprint is kind of used to describe something and the mappings are kind of more like the objects behind it. So if a blueprint was a car, a mapping could be a Ford or a GMC or a Dodge kind of idea. So for Lake Worth, the control structure is the blueprint. And in the blueprint, they have different definitions of what's at a control structure. And I'm using a small subset and I'm using random data to present this today. So there's an upstream and downstream in every control structure, and there's usually one or more gates at the control structure to determine the water that's kind of coming in and out of that control structure, going up into the state or out into the ocean. And then each mapping kind of represents that control structure specifically. So for Lake Worth, actually, they have different tags here. I'm just using random tags to represent all of this data for this demo. So with the blueprint and mapping created, I can actually go in and create a new type of, well, it's not a new type of dashboard, but a dashboard here. Search for the one that I created. So the dashboard component editor, I can pick map. I'm going to pick tag data. I'm going to say that I want to use a blueprint. And then the blueprint I want to use is that control structures blueprint that I was showing you earlier. And then with that, I can actually drop the control structures dashboard on the map here, and I can cycle through a few different ones, and I'll show you that in a bit. So now I have all my blueprints and mappings actually displaying on the page or on the map, kind of where I've determined that they should go. And that can actually be done inside of the mapping. There are properties. I'll just go into one. They just require a latitude and longitude property to determine where this mapping should appear on a map. Once that's in, I can actually now select my mapping and I can actually see data regarding that over here on the right. So this way, if you had any kind of grouping of tags or sites that you wanted to see data on and have it represented kind of on a map screen, you could do so, and you could put that collection into a map. You also don't have to use blueprints in order to map data. You can actually use tag descriptors, which is probably a whole nother session, but you can apply tag descriptors to tags and then use all of those tags to display on a map. With that, then on here, you're not going to get mappings as your markers, but you're just going to get representations of individual tags. And then when you click on that tag, it'll do the same option here where it will actually show the tag data on the map here for as long as the date range that you've configured in the dashboard component editor. One of the other new features of the maps is actually regions. So these more or less polygons that we can kind of draw on the map. And each one of these kind of basins here represent a different region or area of the Lake Worth system. So as I kind of hover over them, I can see a bit of a tooltip that appears displaying what is the name of that region. And that's done down here currently under the dashboard component editor. So there's different regions that we can add. And adding a region is you can hit plus, and then you just need to provide a list of coordinates, of latitudes and longitudes, to plot on the map to tell the map actually how to draw it. So you can see some of these. That one's a relatively small one. I think this one's quite a large one. There's just a ton of coordinates to map the 16th basin region here that we can scroll through. So as you can imagine, it can be a bit of a pain to copy and paste one by one all these coordinates. So there is an edit button that will actually open up this into a text edit field where you can actually just copy and paste a CSV representation of these and then hit plus, and it will actually parse that CSV and display it on the screen. You can also determine what color these regions are. If I want to change this to a black and I want to fill it with a very light blue, I can do so. I don't know if I edited the right one. Apparently I did. Interesting. Well, this big 16th basin should be changing colors now, but I guess that's the one thing I didn't check before I started this, so I think I need to do is to sign out and back in.
Jessica, Jason calling down from the pollution plant. How are you? Good. Looking to see if we can get a 32 delivered for the problems.
Interesting. Okay, well, oh, I know what it is. It's because there's multiple control structures here. So as I mentioned before, you can actually add multiple different dashboards here. And you can do that in the preferences now, where earlier the maps, you can only take one dashboard. But actually now in the maps, you can create many dashboards and add them all on the screen together. With that, you can kind of you can then pick them one by one. Actually, I can show you the way Lake Worth is doing this. So here's a bit more of an in-depth page. So as soon as they load this page now, they can see all of their data for their smart cover sensors, which are configured here as well. You can turn these off and on. They'll actually pull in all the data as soon as they load, and they can get a bit of a overview. Here's all the times the gates were opening and closed and what percentage they were open and closed over the last, I guess this is about 3 days. One of the other options that's kind of been added here, I can show you on this, is we can actually bring in data from ArcGIS. And so they can actually pick this canals option, and I'll turn off these other options to see this better. They can actually get a representation of where all their map or their canals are in their region that they manage. This was built with the GIS system, and then we're just importing this data and displaying it on the map. You can also bring in image overlays. So Florida has the option to, or they have, South Florida manages and shows data in a different way on different screens, and they just have images that they update every 15, 20 minutes. So we're actually pulling that image down, downloading it, and adding a layer of transparency. And then we're actually displaying it over top of the state. We've kind of matched up the coordinates so that we can see it almost perfectly over the area. Now, it doesn't look like Florida's getting any rain at all, but if there is rain in the forecast, these individual markers will kind of turn different colors. So we can actually turn white into a transparency, and this one is actually a black that gets turned into a transparency that also shows weather data over the state. So this way they can kind of see, okay, with all of my structures and data here, what's going to be the rain in the next 3 hours, or what has been the rain for the last 3 hours, to display and kind of get an idea what's the weather pattern going to be like in my different regions or around my different areas. Ryan says there's some questions in the chat.
Yeah, hey, John, we have a question of what is the base map source?
Yeah, the base map source is a leaflet OpenStreetMap. It's open, it's down here. We pop this open. It uses OpenStreetMap by default. You can go into the dashboard editors yourself. Under the display settings, you can actually configure what map background you want to use if you want to pull in one yourself separately. I think Leaflet themselves have a list of different maps or different backgrounds you can actually use. So if there's a specific one you want to bring in, Jeanette, let us know. We'll look at it. I think it has to be, depending on what it is, it has to be attributed to them. So we might need to add some way to attribute certain map backgrounds to the provider. Other question is P and ID. Could a P and ID be added to a map? I will ask a question of what a P and ID is. If you know, Ryan, what that question is talking about from Halton.
Yeah, sorry. I'm pretty sure it's like a schematic, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong. Kind of an overview schematic of
process in your drawing. Yeah, if you had that drawing and you wanted to overlay it on top here, we could do that. So just turn the WebEx toolbar is in the way of my tabs. So kind of bringing in those images is just on here. You can kind of give the image layer a name and a URL of where the image is coming from. If we want to upload images into eRIS and then display them on the map, there would be a way to do that right now, even with this URL, but maybe there would be an easier way to do that to accomplish that goal a little faster, just having a bit of an upload button here if you wanted to overlay it. Then you can configure the opacity, so just how much transparency can you see through on the actual image. right now the transparency color is none, black and white, just to basically just gets rid of this color from the image so that you can see right through it. We can add more colors here. This is just the first two basic ones. And then the corners are just where this image kind of lines up. So for the case of Lake Worth, it was a bit of a painstaking process just to kind of move the item coordinate by coordinate, latitude and longitude, until slowly the lines kind of matched up, specifically with Lake Okeechobee here, very specifically. But if there was a more specific drawing that you wanted to overlay that actually represented something on the site, like as far down as we kind of go down here, I don't know what this is, but we could do that too. You could just kind of map it with these two coordinates and it would overlay on top. It also doesn't actually have to realistically mean anything in terms of the map. If you just want some image on the map, you could also just do that too.
Yes, John, I think maybe what they're asking is, can you use the PNID drawing as the base, like not a map?
Oh, as the actual base.
Right.
I'd have to look and see how Leaflet takes these map backgrounds, if they need to be done in a certain format, and if they do have to be done in a certain format, can we match that format to bring in those drawings? And we, instead of using a geographical, like, you know, literal global map, if we just use that as the background, we can look at that, plotting stuff on top of it. I don't know how that would work, but something we could look into for sure. Okay, was that all the questions too in the chat, I think? I should bring that over so I can see it. As we go back to the map too, we can take a quick look. In the data viewer preferences, there are options to kind of determine how data is displayed. So there is a table view that I'll show you in a second. And if you just have tags plotted on the map, by default, it's just going to use these settings here. But if you're using the blueprint and mapping concept, you can actually pick what blueprint you want to accept and what tag refs of that blueprint you want to receive on or actually display on this screen. And you can also do that for multiple blueprints and mappings. So I alluded to the smart cover data also on the Lake Worth page. And this smart cover, these are also just other blueprints and other mappings that are just kind of overlaid on the page. So you can see we have this one blueprint that only has one mapping, and it's this tide smart cover sensor out in the water here. So here we can kind of configure if someone's picking a smart cover tide blueprint mapping, then we're just going to show the tag. You can actually also include data queries into these selections here. This way you can kind of say, I don't want to use any of this styling up here. I want to use specifically what I've set up in a data query elsewhere. So we have a data query that we've still just called blueprint here. If we edit it, we can actually configure the way that these are displayed, the colors and the symbols and how they appear on the page. Just gives you some more flexibility on how series on these charts should be displayed. All right, great. If there are no more questions on the maps and the new mapping tools, I think that covers all those little items. Can move on to the next item here. So the next option, or the next thing I want to talk about is maintenance mode. Something that also has been around for a little while, but I don't think it's ever been talked about. Maybe we mentioned it once at a partner conference, but never really kind of demonstrated it firsthand. So maintenance mode was created, again, I think this came out of Toronto, where there's other systems on your network that are kind of going down for an hour for maintenance or overnight. Maybe the historian is going down during your key hours when all the calculations are being run at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. And every month, the first Monday of the week, you're coming in and all your calcs failed because they did their scheduled maintenance on the historian. So the maintenance mode kind of allows eRIS to almost shut down or just kind of go quiet for a little bit and not try and work through a bunch of stuff when you know that there's no way that it's going to be able to do something. It also can also double as a bit of a warning system for maybe upcoming sim updates to kind of lock people out of the system, or at least have something within the system to tell people that an update is coming. So if I schedule a maintenance mode time, I can pick it to run for today at, let's do it here. We'll just run it for 5 minutes when we get there. I can add a custom message here. So I can just say, hey, this system is going to go down because trading mode. With that, you have a few options here for maintenance mode. You can show the show warning offset. Basically says how long before the scheduled maintenance do we want to let people know and kind of warn people about maintenance mode? Do you want to just let them know half an hour before? Do you want to remind them for a full 3 hours before the system goes down? So that's what that option allows you to do, and I will show you what that option looks like in a minute. Stop scheduled tasks is what I was talking about here, where during this maintenance mode time, like that the calculations aren't going to be able to run because historian is down, or something is just not going to be operating and you know it, and you can actually say stop scheduled tasks for that time. You can also pick how long before do you want the scheduled tasks to stop. That way, if your maintenance mode is at 2 a.m., you don't want scheduled tasks to start at 1:55 a.m. So you actually want to tell eRIS to stop working on scheduled tasks about 2 hours before, because it usually takes about an hour and a half to an hour for tasks to become completed. Then you also have the option of during maintenance mode. Do you want to allow user access or do you want no user access? Like you don't even want people on the system. You don't want them trying to make logbook entries. You don't want them trying to run data queries. Everyone needs to kind of stay off during that time. Or is this kind of, logbooks are still going to be operational, but some data might just not be allowed? You can actually pick allow user access. And during the whole time of the maintenance, they will get a warning message saying, this, whatever you've selected here is what they're going to get a warning message here. So if a historian or a database is going down, you can kind of write, hey, prophecy tags are going to work for the next half hour because there's scheduled maintenance on them. And then that way operators could still go in, they could still do their validation, their logbooks. They just want to be able to run data queries specifically to prophecy. The last option for a maintenance mode is the priority, in which scheduled tasks come back up. So if during the scheduled maintenance time, I'm basically going to be very behind on my calculations. I can pick calculations to go first. And once calculations are done, you kind of want to say, you know what, after calcs are done, I need my validation tags to run, and then my reports can run. Or maybe you want reports to be the first thing because they're the most critical front end item. You can move those to the top just to kind of schedule the priority in which eRIS starts dealing with scheduled tasks, instead of just picking up where it left off and maybe not getting to your calculations until 6 a.m. and that's just too late because operators are coming in soon and you want those items done. So if I save this, I think I've talked enough that I'm just going to get really close to the actual scheduled maintenance time. I'll just go to another tab here. So now that I'm actually going into a maintenance mode, I'm going to see this little warning message in the bottom corner saying eRIS is scheduled to go into maintenance mode at about 15:40 hours, and during this time eRIS will be unavailable. So if I had picked the allow user access, I would say the option here, eRIS will be available at this time with limited functionality. So now we're kind of at this point where we need to wait 1 more minute for maintenance mode to go down, or maintenance mode to bring the server down. So what I can show you is during this time, just as we're pending the maintenance mode, if you go back into this screen, depending on if we shut down calculations, this should be saying the maintenance mode has been acknowledged, and you'll actually be shutting down soon. Actually, my maintenance mode is not going to kick off for an hour. I actually want to bump this up. Save this. Reload this page. We still get our maintenance mode warning. Now we're a little bit earlier. So now we've kind of hit our maintenance mode, and we're locked out of eRIS. Or all we get is a little eRIS logo, and we're just going to say, hey, the system's going to go down because we're doing a demonstration. So normally you'd have to wait 5 minutes or however long you specified this maintenance mode would go for until it comes back up. But because I on the server, I can actually just end maintenance mode myself. Kind of come back in here, and you can see this maintenance mode be scheduled again, and only certain settings can be modified before the maintenance mode ends. I can also just end now and just end the maintenance mode beforehand. It's just kind of a useful trick or a tool to kind of keep people off the system when you know that they're not going to be able to accomplish anything because of other outages or concerns on the system. Does anyone have any questions on maintenance mode or how it works or suggestions for it? Hearing none. So I'll move on to a very, very small one, very small update for trend that is actually also available for data query. So if I just pick a new trend, pick some new tags, run trend portlet, and I just map them on the page. There's a chart here. This is nothing groundbreaking, but there's a new download chart button here. You can actually just hit download chart, and we're going to get the chart itself, and we're just going to get just the image of the chart by itself. We can actually export the trend chart image. This is also available in the data query, where you normally export charts to CSV or Excels. There's going to be a new option there that just says export chart only, and you're going to get a similar image here. So if you just want the image of the chart, but you don't have to download an Excel file and copy the image out of it, there is an option to download it directly. That was something crazy, so we can move right along to data entry sheets. So similar to anyone who's been kind of using data entry forms version 2, data entry forms version 2 has this concept of instant data entry forms, or on-demand data entry forms, I believe it's called, where you don't actually have to pick a data entry form that is good for a day or an hour or a week, or is only available on Mondays. There's an option to actually pick data entry or data entry forms v2 that are defined right now, or for not necessarily a time, but for a task. So we've kind of brought that concept into data entry sheets as well. I have a sheet here called Instant, which is actually nothing special. It's just one big cell block that is configured here. And then there's a new option in the data entry sheet template management portlet that you can go into here and select. And there's an option for allow instant sheets and then allow custom names for those instant sheets. So I have those both checked here. So with these items checked, I should be able to create a data entry sheet for any time I want, or more specifically, anything I want. So I pick my data entry sheet instant. I don't have my date picker here. For those of you who use data entry sheets, you're defined for all other data entry sheets, you're defined to whatever time constraint is applied to the sheet. So this is a daily sheet, so you're only going to get one per day. Where with the instant, you can just create them kind of on demand or instantaneously. So if I create this, boom, immediately I get my data entry sheet. I do have to give it a name, and by default, it uses the current time just as the unique identifier. But I can call this anything I want, like my demo instant sheet on the page, and I can just save that. Now this sheet isn't tied to a certain time. It still uses a sheet date. Just for internal purposes, you can still kind of use a sheet date to display sheet times on the screen, but there's nothing that's constraining the sheet to a certain time. And if you open up the history kind of option here in the folder, you can actually see I had made one before the demo here, this file, instant before demo, and I can actually kind of open these instantaneous data entry sheets one by one. Some may also notice too, something that's changed recently with data entry sheets, just as I talk about it. The page no longer reloads when you send sheets to the data entry sheet page. Everything is kind of trying to be more focused on a single page kind of feel. So the page isn't constantly reloading on you as you change different items. Behind the scenes, we are using something called hands-on table for the actual Excel feel of this page, and we've been trying to keep up to date with hands-on table as well to bring all the latest features onto the screen. So if anyone's looking for more information on what data entry sheets is using, it's called hands-on table. Jeanette asks, can they, it does indicate 1 day, can they be for longer than 1 day, the data entry sheets? And you can. Your duration can be anything. You have a pick from 1 day, 2 days, all the way up to 1 year, or you can be custom for your duration. The concept doesn't really apply too much to instantaneous data entry sheets. This is what I was thinking about yesterday as I was preparing for this, is some of these options don't necessarily apply if you are allowing for data entry sheets. So they can kind of be a little confusing. But if you were not going to allow data entry sheets, you could pick a sheet to act for, have a duration of 5 days, 1 day, or however long you really want, day and a half. It doesn't really matter. Maybe it's something we can do in another session for a data entry sheet to kind of talk about some of these options at the top. Hopefully that answers your question, Jeanette. The other new thing with data entry sheets is you can kind of, well, not kind of, you can configure cell borders now. So if anyone who is, any clients who are pretty, or partners who are pretty into the data entry sheets, know that if you wanted to update borders, you actually had to download the Excel file, update the borders in Excel, and then re-upload the actual data entry sheet. Now there are styles here where you can actually change what colors you want all the borders to be right from within eRIS without having to download and re-import the data entry sheet. So just makes things a little easier, make your sheets maybe pop a little more without having to export out to Excel. Any other questions on data entry sheets?
John, while you're doing borders, you just want to show them what the batch format on the borders will do?
Yeah. So the batch format here, which already existed, you can just pick one border color instead of all four, and it just kind of does it in a, I guess, more of a table 1 by 1 format. So if you want to kind of make the whole sheet pop a little, you can just apply black to everything. So it kind of grids it out like this. All right, well, that's data entry sheets. There is one last item that I actually don't have a full example for, but we can talk about really quickly, or at least show. Trying to find one that has a merge. Oh, we'll just add a new one. So for those of you who use
try .60.
So one on .60?
I think I might have one on there.
.60 or .37? Oh, for this one. You guys have locked me out. These are our development servers, so I don't know what's going on with the .60, but
Plus 37.
this is a very, very experimental server. Let's see. I'm assuming it would have something like Ryan in it.
Yeah, either that or merge. Third one down, I think.
Right. So we have made some improvements to the way that the tag merges work. Where previously, Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we were always just using whatever merge was last, correct? Using whatever one was configured last. First? Well, okay, we were using whatever one was first and ignoring the rest of them. And then there was no way for you to kind of toggle which one is first. So these merges can actually now be applied. I forget how you described it, Ryan, but it's more of a customizable or ordered data merge, prioritizing data merges that you can kind of select through in this list to determine
so really what we wanted to do with this one, like the RL merge 1 tag, we wanted to look at that. If something wasn't there, we wanted to look at 2. If something wasn't there, we wanted to look at 3, and so on down the line. So we wanted to go kind of in an order. Where before, if it would hit check the first one and it found a value, it would just stop. No, you know what? Maybe you are right. It might have been the last, because it would keep going until it found the last value, and then it would display that one, and it wouldn't stop at the different steps. So now it'll look at the secondary transform that's first, and it'll stop there if it finds a value. If not, it'll go to the next one, and if not, it'll go to the next one.
I think these tags have been removed from this dev system, right? Since we did this. Yeah, the tags don't exist.
Yeah, but it's really just a step-by-step tag merge. It just goes down the line in whichever order you have the secondaries set up.
Mm-hmm.
Just allows a little bit more flexibility with your merges.
Yeah. So well, those are the new features that we kind of wanted to highlight today. If anyone else had any questions on these, ask now, go for it. Otherwise, feel free to ask questions later, or if you want help implementing things, reach out to us and we can definitely help you with building out map tools. And if you want to try out maintenance mode for something, or the new logbook periods, if you have any questions or ideas or improvements, then we can go over that as well. So. Well, thanks for joining, everyone. Guess you'll have 10 minutes back. Enjoy your Wednesdays. Guess we'll see you in a quarter.
Thanks, everyone.